Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We are going on a journey through human history to explore the ultimate cosmic showdown, the concepts of God, the absence of God, and the personification of evil. We'll trace how the devil evolved from a literal, terrifying monster battling supreme deities into a psychological test of faith, and finally, we'll dive heavily into the secular and atheistic perspectives where God is dead, the devil is a myth, and evil is nothing more than a reflection of human nature.
It really is just this massive philosophical arc. And we are pulling from some incredible source material for this deep dive today.
Right. We've got the transcripts analyzing global concepts of the devil across, a bunch of different cultures.
Exactly. And alongside that, a really deep exploration into John Milton's legendary epic poem, Paradise Regained.
Which is fascinating.
Oh, it's brilliant. We are essentially looking at how humanity has historically drawn the line between the divine and the dark.
And, well, how that line completely dissolves in modern secular thought.
Spot on.
The mission today is to figure out the mechanics of that evolution. I mean, how do we get from literal world-ending cosmic battles to an entirely atheistic framework that flips the script on traditional ideas of God and Satan?
Yeah, we want to understand not just what people believed, but why they believed it, and how those beliefs shaped human psychology.
Definitely. Before we jump into all of that, I want to take a quick second to say to you listening, if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. Your support means we can keep doing these massive explorations.
And we really need that time today. Because to understand the atheistic absence of God and the devil, we have to start at the absolute opposite end of the spectrum.
Right, back at the beginning.
Exactly. We have to look at how humans first visualized this clash. For ancient minds, evil wasn't a metaphor.
It wasn't just like a psychological concept or a bad mood.
No, not at all. It was a literal physical war between dual opposing forces.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because reading through the sources, these early concepts read exactly like a cosmic superhero versus supervillain narrative.
They really do.
The universe isn't just a passive place where things happen. It is an active, violent battleground. There is a good side, there is a bad side, and they are, actively throwing down.
Yeah, the clearest early example of this dualistic worldview is Zoroastrianism. You have this supreme god, Ahura Mazda, who represents all that is good.
Okay.
And he's locked in an eternal struggle against Angra, the evil spirit tied to suffering and destruction.
Right.
But what you have to understand here is that neither entity is completely all-powerful in the present moment.
Wow, really? So they're actually evenly matched?
Essentially, yeah. That means the fight is real, the outcome is genuinely contested, and the stakes are literally the fate of the world you live in.
That's intense.
It is. And this dualism is what heavily influenced the Abrahamic religions later on.
I mean, it makes sense why that would resonate with people. If you look around and see disease, famine, and war, it's much easier to process if you believe there is a literal bad guy actively trying to ruin things.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just Zoroastrianism either. You see this strict literal division in Manichaeism too.
Right. The sources describe how the kingdom of light is completely separate from the kingdom of darkness there.
Exactly. In their mythology, the world was created when darkness attacked light. They believed human souls were literal particles of light.
Which is such a wild visual.
It is. And those particles were trapped inside the material grasp of the devil.
It basically frames human existence as an ongoing hostage situation.
Yes, exactly that. And what's crucial is how this theology dictates real-world action for the people who believe it. Like if we look at ancient Egypt, you have Apep.
The giant snake, right?
Yeah, this massive serpent of cosmic chaos. Apep is literally lurking in the western mountains, waiting to attack Ra, the sun god, every single day to stop the sun from rising.
Just a daily literal war in the sky.
Literally. Or take the Maori god of darkness in Polynesian mythology, Wiro. He rules the underworld and actually feeds on the dead to grow stronger.
Right, and that detail from the sources blew my mind. Because Wiro feeds on corpses, the Maori preferred cremation.
Yep, it was a very practical response to a supernatural belief.
It just shows how these beliefs weren't just abstract stories. Like, if the devil is a literal monster eating the dead to build an army to devour the surface world, you burn the bodies.
You deny him the fuel.
Exactly. It is a strictly physical countermeasure to a physical threat.
And that is the absolute core of dualism. You are physically fighting back. But this concept runs into a massive philosophical roadblock as theology evolves.
Yeah, specifically when religions begin to claim that God is entirely supreme and unrivaled.
Right, the monotheistic shift.
Which brings up a huge point of confusion for me when we shift over to Christianity, and specifically John Milton's Paradise Regained.
Oh yeah, that's a perfect example.
Because we aren't dealing with two equal gods fighting anymore. We are dealing with Jesus, who is supposed to be fully God, going out into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan.
Mm-hmm.
If Jesus is omnipotent, it's like playing a video game with God mode turned on.
That's a really good analogy.
Right. Like, the monsters can hit you, but your health bar never drops. So where is the tension in that? How could temptation even be real if he knows he's going to win?
That paradox right there is the exact theological debate that raged during Milton's time. And it's central to the source material we are analyzing today.
Because it just seems like a rigged game.
It does. If a divine being knows the future and has absolute power, any temptation is entirely null and void. I mean, a choice isn't really a choice if you are completely immune to the pressure.
So does Milton just make Jesus a robot who can't feel temptation? Because if so, the whole story kind of falls apart for me.
No, actually, he takes the opposite approach, which is brilliant. Milton writes from the perspective that while Jesus possessed the perfect mind and wisdom of the divine, his physical experience in the wilderness was entirely limited to the human condition.
Okay, so he's feeling everything.
Everything. He felt agonizing, hunger, real sadness, and, genuine fear. If he didn't experience the actual brutal downsides of human frailty, his rejection of temptation would mean absolutely nothing.
Wow. So when he's out in the wilderness for 40 days, he's actually starving. He is suffering the exact way you or I would suffer.
Precisely. And that vulnerability is exactly what Satan tries to exploit.
Right, but Milton's Satan isn't like a beast or a dragon here.
No, he's a charismatic, tragic, highly intelligent rebel. He targets Jesus's physical limitations first.
The hunger.
Yeah, he appears disguised as an old man and tells a starving Jesus to just turn the rocks into bread. And when that fails, he literally conjures a magical, opulent banquet in the middle of the woods.
That is the ultimate stress test for someone who hasn't eaten in over a month.
It really is. And Satan's arguments are incredibly manipulative. He shifts from physical needs to ego and pride.
How so?
Well, he tells Jesus, you are supposed to be a great king. If you want to conquer the Roman Empire and bring peace to the world, you need armies. You need wealth and fame.
Like practical political power.
Exactly. Satan says, I can give you all of it right now. Just bow to me. You see, Satan views everything through the lens of power and military conquest.
Because that's what he understands.
Right. He assumes Jesus must want the exact same things he wanted when he rebelled against God.
And Jesus completely shuts him down.
Mm-hmm.
Which culminates in that wild moment on the pinnacle of the temple.
It's the climax.
Satan basically says, if you're really the Son of God, jump off this temple and let the angels catch you. He's trying to goad Jesus into a flashy display of ego.
Just baiting him.
Yeah, but Jesus just quotes scripture and refuses to play the game, which completely breaks Satan.
What's fascinating here is how the concept of the adversary must fundamentally shift depending on the supreme power of God. In Milton's work, Satan is a rogue agent acting against God's ultimate plan, but still ultimately powerless to stop it.
He's dangerous, but he's not an existential threat to God's rule.
Exactly. But if we transition to traditions where God is entirely supreme, the devil becomes something else entirely.
He can't be a rival.
No, he cannot. If God is all-powerful, a rival is a logical impossibility. Therefore, the adversary becomes merely an employee, a test, or even an illusion.
It feels like moving from a cosmic war zone to a corporate structure.
I like that. How do you mean?
Well, if God is the undisputed CEO of the universe, then the devil isn't launching a hostile takeover. He's the auditor.
Ah, yeah.
He's someone explicitly hired to stress test the system, to poke at the employees and make sure they are actually doing their jobs and committed to the company.
That auditor analogy aligns perfectly with the Islamic and Jewish concepts outlined in the sources.
Let's get into those.
Okay, so in Islam, the figure of evil is Iblis, a jinn made of smokeless fire. When God created Adam, Iblis refused to bow out of sheer pride.
But he doesn't start a war.
No, here is the critical mechanism. God actually grants Iblis permission to tempt humanity until the day of judgment.
Wait, so God allows it?
Yes. Evil is utilized by God as a necessary test of free will. Iblis isn't threatening God's power at all. He's acting as a permitted distractor to see who is truly righteous.
So he's stirring up anger or impure thoughts to pull you away from prayer. but he only has the power that God allows him to have.
Precisely.
And Judaism operates on a similar wavelength, right? Because the supernatural, independent devil opposing God doesn't really exist in traditional Judaism.
It doesn't. In the Hebrew Bible, Satan is not a personal name. It literally translates to the adversary or the accuser.
So the job title.
Exactly. He is an agent in God's divine court.
Yeah.
To use your analogy, think of him as the prosecuting attorney.
Like in the story of Job?
Yes, in the story of Job, Satan doesn't attack Job out of rogue malice. He asks for and receives explicit divine permission to test Job's faith.
Oh, wow.
He is carrying out a function entirely within God's absolute sovereignty.
Which is such a massive shift from the Zoroastrian idea of two gods fighting.
Completely different universe, philosophically.
And once you establish that evil isn't a rival deity, the logical next step for some philosophies is to internalize it completely.
Make it psychological.
Right. You don't even need an auditor anymore. The test isn't entirely within your own mind.
We see this heavily in Eastern traditions.
Yeah, like in Sikhism, there is no literal Satan roaming the earth.
No, evil is represented by Maya, which is illusion, and the five thieves.
Right. Pride, lust, greed, attachment, and anger.
Exactly. These are internal psychological forces that steer you away from spiritual growth.
And the Baha'i faith shares a highly similar perspective.
They do. They explicitly do not believe in a literal devil. Satan is strictly a metaphor for the lower selfish nature of humans.
So when people let their egos define their actions instead of focusing on spiritual growth, that is what they consider satanic.
Yeah, it is an internal turning away, not an external demonic attack.
It's so interesting how the focus shifts completely to human responsibility. Oh, and I have to bring up Tengriism here too, from Central Asia.
Oh yeah, that's a great example from the transcripts.
Because it beautifully captures this idea of good and evil as a necessary intertwined balance. In their myths, you have this devil-like figure named Erlik. But Erlik actually helped God create the earth. They were working together, pulling mud from the primordial water.
Right, they were co-creators, essentially.
Yeah, but Erlik deceitfully hid some mud in his mouth to create his own world. When the earth expanded, he started choking, and God forced him to spit it out, which created swamps and wastelands.
It is just a remarkably pragmatic view of creation. Like, swamps and wastelands exist, so they must have a purpose in the grand design.
Right. Erlik was banished for his deceit, but he was still a foundational part of the cosmic order. Good and evil aren't in pure opposition trying to destroy each other. They are two sides of the same coin that make up the messy reality we actually live in.
And that concept of a flawed creator making a messy reality bridges us perfectly to traditions that fundamentally rebel against the traditional idea of God entirely.
Which is a huge pivot.
It is.
Yeah.
This is the philosophical groundwork that paves the way for modern atheism, where the entire script is flipped.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because you have to wonder, logically, why would anyone root for the bad guy?
Right. It seems counterintuitive.
It does. If the devil is historically the adversary of supreme good, why would anyone look at the adversary and say, actually, that's the hero?
To understand that pivot, we have to look at Gnosticism. Gnostic traditions completely invert the Orthodox narrative.
Completely upside down.
Yeah, they view the creator of this physical material world, an entity they call the demiurge, as a flawed, ignorant, and tyrannical deity.
Wait.
Yeah.
Let me make sure I'm getting this. In their view, the God of the Old Testament, the one who created the earth and the Garden of Eden, is actually the bad guy.
To many Gnostic sects, yes.
Oh, wow.
They believe the true, supreme God is entirely hidden, completely separate from this material realm of suffering. The material world is inherently a prison of suffering.
Therefore, the entity that trapped us here is an oppressor.
Exactly. And because of that flipped perspective, certain Gnostic texts cast the serpent in the Garden of Eden not as a deceptive devil, but as a liberator.
A liberator.
Yes, the serpent is a hero delivering secret knowledge or gnosis to humanity against the will of a tyrant who wanted to keep humans ignorant, naked, and subservient.
Wow. So rebellion becomes a moral imperative.
Exactly.
When you eat the apple, you aren't falling from grace, you are breaking out of jail.
That's a great way to summarize it.
And that exact sentiment is the dividing line when we look at modern Satanism, which our sources explicitly detail, because there is a stark divide there.
There really is.
You have theistic Satanists who actually worship a literal supernatural rebel entity, but then you have atheistic Satanism.
And just to pause here for you listening, because this touches on modern sociopolitical activism.
Right, we should clarify.
Our goal isn't to endorse or condemn the Satanic Temple or any specific group's actions. We are strictly unpacking how our source material describes their philosophical use of this imagery.
Absolutely, just laying out what the sources say.
Right. But yes, atheistic Satanism, represented by groups like Levian Satanism and the Satanic Temple, is far more prevalent in the public eye today.
Mm-hmm.
And to be fundamentally clear, for atheistic Satanists, God does not exist at all.
And neither does the devil.
Correct. Satan is not a literal being to them. He is purely a literary and philosophical symbol.
A mascot, almost.
Basically.
Yep.
For Anton LaVey in the 1960s, Satan represented human nature, pride, indulgence, and personal power.
So leaning into everything the church said was bad.
Exactly. He viewed Satan as the ultimate adversary to the restrictive, guilt-based systems of traditional religions that he felt suppressed natural human instincts.
And the Satanic Temple takes that symbol a step further into active political and social defiance.
Yes, very publicly.
They use the imagery of Satan to fight for justice, free thought, and rebellion against what they perceive as oppressive religious overreach in the public sphere.
It's completely secular activism.
Right. They don't believe a guy with horns is living underground commanding them. They are using the ultimate historical symbol of rebellion to challenge authority.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this brings us directly into the core of the atheistic and secular evaluation of reality.
The final evolution.
Yeah, we've journeyed all the way from literal cosmic dragons to a universe entirely void of literal supernatural beings. In this worldview, there is no supreme God to save us, and there is no cosmic devil to tempt us.
Which means evil isn't a dark magical force spreading through the world like a virus. It isn't an entity.
No. In the secular and existential view, evil is a construct born entirely from human actions and human choices.
It's just us.
Just us. It requires absolutely no cosmic adversary to explain it. This is where the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's famous declaration, "God is dead," becomes so incredibly crucial to our deep dive.
People always quote God is dead on t-shirts and in movies, but what does it actually mean for human psychology in this context?
Well, a lot of people misinterpret it as a victory lap for atheism.
Like he was happy about it.
Right. But Nietzsche wasn't celebrating. He was terrified.
Really?
Yeah, he was observing that the Enlightenment and the rise of secular science had effectively made the concept of the Christian God unbelievable for modern educated society.
Okay, that makes sense.
But because God is dead, the traditional absolute moral framework that Western society was built on had lost its ultimate authority.
Ah, I see.
Without a divine judge dictating what is objectively good and objectively evil, humanity was suddenly left completely adrift to define morality for itself.
Which is a staggering weight to carry.
It's immense.
Think about it. If God isn't setting the rules and the devil isn't the one breaking them, then it's just us alone in the dark.
Exactly.
And that ties directly into Albert Camus, right? He looked at the world without God and saw it as absurd and inherently meaningless.
Yes. Camus viewed human life as a constant struggle to find purpose in a chaotic, godless universe.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is. In his existential philosophy, the concept of Satan isn't a mastermind plotting our downfall. Satan is simply a metaphor for our own human defiance against the terrifying disorder of reality.
Wow.
We're essentially screaming into the void, trying to impose meaning and justice on a universe that simply does not care about us one way or the other.
So what does this all mean? If we take all of this from the literal monsters fighting sun gods to the psychological tests of our ego, all the way to this stark atheistic reality, what it really does is shift the blame.
Completely.
It entirely removes the excuse of, the devil made me do it.
It completely strips away the cosmic scapegoat.
Yes. Because think about how we justify our own mistakes.
Yeah.
It is so comforting to blame your environment or an outside force.
Human nature to deflect.
Exactly. In the Middle Ages, if you did something terrible, you could blame a literal demon for possessing you or tricking you. Even in Milton's Paradise Regained, which is a deeply religious text, Satan basically admits to Jesus that he isn't forcing humanity to do anything against their will.
He basically says they're doing it to themselves.
Right. Satan says, they ask me for signs, they ask me for dreams, they want wealth. He argues he's just giving humans what they already desire.
He's just facilitating.
Yes. But in the atheistic reality, the safety net is gone. The blame shifts entirely from the cosmos to human will. There is no evil spirit whispering in your ear.
No demons making you do it.
If you do something horrific, it's because you, a human being, chose to do it.
And that is a remarkably heavy burden to bear. The evolution we've traced through these sources today is profound. We started with humanity looking up at the sky and down into the earth, imagining cosmic dragons and dark princes fighting supreme deities.
Right.
It was a way to explain why bad things happen without taking the blame.
It was external. Bad things happen because monsters are fighting gods, and we are just, caught in the crossfire.
Then, as theology matured, the adversary was internalized. The devil became the accuser in the divine court, the permitted tester of our faith.
Or simply the psychological manifestation of our own selfish ego pulling us away from enlightenment.
Exactly. And finally, we arrive at the secular, atheistic reality. The grand cosmic battleground is swept away. We stand entirely alone.
Yeah, we are responsible for our own morality, our own justice, and our own cruelty.
Without any divine safety nets to catch us.
Or demonic fall guys to point the finger at.
This raises an important question, one that lingers long after you close the source material. If the atheistic view is correct, and we have truly outgrown the concepts of a literal God and a literal devil, does taking full, unshielded responsibility for our own actions make us a more moral species? Or does removing the cosmic adversary, that ultimate terrifying symbol of what we shouldn't be, leave us uniquely vulnerable to the unfettered darkness of our own human nature?